as you said, change comes slowly to Pennsylvania. We're having great discussions about it. I'm optimistic that the day will come, for us, for my kids, where they'll look back and be like, can you imagine that there used to be a time when nobody hunted on Sundays?
Yeah.
Like, I'm looking forward to them thinking it's crazy that used to be the case.
I was like, well, if I throw a mic on, then I can help others the way that these people have all helped me.
Born in the heart of the Pennsylvania deer camp. With the help of experts, friends, and local legends, we bring you valuable knowledge and powerful stories for your hunting adventures. Welcome to the East Meets West Hunt Podcast with your host, Beau Martonik.
All right, we are live. Steve Smith, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Beau. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate you making the drive and coming to meet with me. So, Steve, the executive director of the Pennsylvania Game Commission. And Steve, what I guess just to kind of give a little bit of a background on yourself personally, how did you get to here?
Yeah, sure. And first, though, let me just say, Beau, appreciate you inviting me here, and been a big fan of yours for a while. I really appreciate what you bring to the hunting community. I love your style of hunting. I love the fact that for you, it's not just about filling a tag. It matters how you filled that tag, where you filled that tag, the kind of effort that went into filling that tag. I love all of that. So I just appreciate that you bring an awareness to that kind of hunting and what you've done. So thanks for having me. I've had this day circled on my calendar for a long time, so glad we were able to make it work.
Oh, no, I appreciate that. And it's funny when I reached out to Emily about doing this podcast and I thought that was awesome that you were like, yeah, I want to come.
Let's do it. Let's totally. Let's talk hunting.
Yeah.
Talk hunting with Beau. That's a pretty good day. So,
well, I don't know about that, but I appreciate it.
Yeah, no. So as far as background, honestly, it's probably no different from yours, from a lot of people who listen to your show. I grew up with really a unhealthy obsession with hunting, with being outdoors, and was fortunate enough to grow up in a rural part of Berks County down in the southeast. At least 30, 40 years ago, it was pretty rural. So and when I say we, my brothers and I, we knew every inch of those mountains. We grew up, started out carrying a Red Ryder BB gun. Didn't shoot our eye out, shot just about everything else, but carrying a BB gun, then graduated to 22, 20 gauge, then bow, and hunting squirrels, groundhogs, deer. And we did a lot of our hunting right there where we grew up, but the pinnacle of the year was going north to hunt rifle season in the big woods.
Yeah.
So after Thanksgiving, we load up and make that pilgrimage, that trip up to Potter County, hunt deer, mainly in the Susquehannock State Forest.
Yep.
So just early 90s is when I started, and just fell in love with hunting Pennsylvania whitetails in those big woods. That was, like I said, that was the pinnacle. That's Super Bowl, World Series, everything rolled into one is hunting back there. And, to be honest, it was rough hunting. It's a rough way to cut your teeth hunting deer. In fact, my first deer hunting experience, my dad, he had us out. For him, the big thing was you got to be the first one there. So we, got up ridiculously early in the dark, hiked way back into this ridge, and he set me on a saddle, and he's like, sit against that tree and don't move, and I'll see you at dark. And it was like, if you're going to see a herd deer come by, and look for the buck and shoot the buck at the end of the herd. And and he was off, and he positioned all of us, and he'd make rounds and check on us all day. And it was a lot of fun, though. It's tough hunting, but it was a lot of fun. And we ended up shooting a good number of deer.
Yeah.
A good number of mountain deer. I can't say that too many of them back then would have been featured on Mountain Buck Monday. We're talking spikes, 4 points and all that, but we loved it. I absolutely fell in love with hunting in Pennsylvania as a kid, and had no idea that it was really laying the groundwork and shaping the trajectory of my life. And thought I was going to do something else after college, got into a whole nother profession, but found I just didn't have any passion to do that for the next 30, 40 years. So when a chance came to work for the Pennsylvania Game Commission, I jumped at it and didn't look back, and been thrilled and blessed to work with the commission for almost 2 decades now. Kind of worked my way up through the ranks, and was about a year ago, was given the opportunity to be executive director. So appreciative, to say the least, of the role that I get to play and the responsibility now that I have.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I love that you went into that background and as a kid and growing up and going up and hunting was. So I have a question. Back in the early 90s, was the deer population crazy at that point in that area?
I wouldn't say crazy. I would say it had peaked and was starting to come down.
Okay.
And, we heard the stories of like herds of, 40, 50. I never saw anything like that.
Gotcha.
For us, it was, you might see 10, 12, like that wasn't unusual. Usually grouped together. And like I said, you always look for that buck, bring it up, trailing the rear. And then you had to make sure he moved his ears so you could look for the spikes. And so I wouldn't say it was crazy. Again, heard the glory day stories, so to speak, of what it was like. And anybody who's ever been through there, like you see on the trees where guys, write like 74, 75, 76, 77, they put it. So I grew up just enthralled with that heritage of hunting those big woods and hearing those kind of stories and what that was like.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I guess that would have been earlier. I remember hearing the stories of, my grandfather talking about when they would go and they'd sit on, this rock and it'd be like, they'd have a fire going and everything and herds of deer that were like, a lot. And they're like, but you didn't see anything that was bigger than a spike or, 4-point that came by at that point. Yeah. And it seemed like the body size of the deer were a lot smaller during that point.
Yeah. In fact, one time I shot a buck first light, drug it out, and we hunted pretty far back. And when I got to the car, my dad he was already there, and he's like, hey, I shot a buck, but my knee's bothering, so can you go drag it out for me? So I turned around, went back, and drug out another buck. You can't do that today. Like the idea of dragging out like 2 buck back to back, and I was still back by like 2:00 in the afternoon. Good luck today trying to haul a buck out.
Yeah.
But back then, it was the body sizes were much smaller, so you could do something like that.
It's funny. There's a company I bought a 3D target from, Big Shot. They're out of Pennsylvania, and they have like a model called the mountain, like a mountain deer, and it's a smaller body. And I it's funny because that's not really the way that it is today. I mean, some of the deer that we're shooting have body size like I'm seeing in the Midwest. Yeah, it just big, big body deer.
Different animals than they did back in the 90s for sure. So
and personally, I mean, I think a lot of that has to do with the food availability, with the timber management side of things, and the habitat and the lower numbers to be able to have the food. That's my uneducated opinion on it.
I think it's a pretty educated opinion. I mean, that's what it comes down to, right? Is the habitat's a lot better in some areas now than it was back then. We used to, like I said, we'd get up on a ridge and you could see all the way down to the bottom. And we didn't think anything of it. We thought it was normal to be able to see 300 yards down to the bottom of the mountain. Like that was the big woods, right? But, it turns out that you see that impact in the body size of the deer and the age class of the deer, how many are able to survive. So absolutely, that difference has played out.
Yeah, when I've traveled to places where they don't do any timber cutting or anything else, and have hunted it, even within Pennsylvania and outside of the state. And it was funny, I'd find these like remote places thinking, I'm going to find this, next level buck that I've never seen before here, and get back there and I realized that a lot of you might find some older age class deer, but they don't have the bodies or the antler size that you would find in some of these areas that are more managed, I guess. When it comes to that,
all comes down to that availability of food. What's going to sustain them through those long winters? Where's their body fat going, and is it keeping them alive or to antler development? It makes a big impact, no doubt about it.
Yeah. With your job now, do you still get to hunt quite a bit, or is it one of those things where you're in it all the time and you don't get as much of a chance?
So I've been in the current position for a year.
Yeah.
And other than in grad school, I never hunted as less as I did this past year.
Okay.
So that is been a challenge, no doubt about it. There was a couple of nice mornings in November when I'm driving to the office and it was killing me, not going to lie. So that's all right. I knew that going in and that's how it should be, honestly. This isn't a job where you kind of part-time it. So throughout the year, it's definitely impacting my ability to hunt, but that's all right. My day will come when I'll have more opportunities to hunt. Right now it's focused on the job, but I'll sneak out every now and then. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, and you were saying like when it came to you first wanting to work for the Pennsylvania Game Commission, what was Was it the idea of you loved hunting as much? Was there anything that was like specific, like that you were driven to be like, this is what I want to do?
Yeah, that love of hunting definitely was the driving factor.
Yeah.
And I had been doing, professionally, I was doing something completely different. I was practicing law. So I had a background in law, and before then I had a political science degree. So I knew law and politics, and then on my personal side, my interest was hunting. So just about the time I figured I can't continue for the next 30 years, 40 years practicing law. Like there's not a lot of work-life balance when you're working 12-hour days, 6 days a week. And I was like, this just isn't for me. I want to be hunting.
Yes.
In fact, one of my first jury trials was the entire first week of May. And I can remember being in the courtroom, looking out the window at a mountain and being like, I bet you there's a gobbler screaming up there on that ridge. And I'm in here. Like I was having some conflict then with it. So it just so happens that I reached that epiphany where I was like, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. Well, what do I want to do?
Yeah.
And I saw that the Game Commission was hiring for a position of legislative liaison, which is somebody who works with the legislature on crafting legislation that impacts hunting. So I'm like, well, this is checking all the boxes for me. This is exactly, I love hunting. I have a background in law and politics. I was like, you could not have tailor-made a better job for me, in my opinion. So I put in on it. Wasn't really sure what would happen. And to my surprise, I got a call. And my predecessor, Executive Director Carl Rowe, called me up and he said, do you want to come work for us? And I was like, when can I start? This is what I want to do. So I haven't looked back since. Kind of worked my way through the ranks, did a couple different positions, and now in this role.
Yeah. Oh, that's really cool. So, the one of the main reasons that I wanted to do this podcast is like, I think there's sometimes a disconnect between the Pennsylvania Game Commission and the hunters from the outside looking in. You guys are always the bad guys, like making changes or doing things and people don't like change. I think Pennsylvania hunters specifically don't love change to be able to do so. And I thought this would be a good opportunity for us to have a conversation, as well. You're a hunter as well, but myself as a hunter here that speaks to a lot of people in Pennsylvania, and yourself of like, kind of how you guys are going about this and what, the changes, the regulations and everything that you're going through, kind of how you're doing it. And I, like I said earlier, I appreciate you coming here, but I think that's great that you're open to talking about that.
Absolutely. I feel like it's incumbent upon us to be able to explain what we're doing to our hunters. And I say that as a hunter myself, but and a lot of us at the Game Commission, as you would expect, are people very similar to me. It was, you're trying to decide which direction to go in life professionally, and the opportunity comes to work at the Game Commission where you can be aligned with your personal interests and your professional interests. So I always find it funny, when people make a comment, well, there's nobody who hunts at the Game Commission. It's like, come to our office in November and see how many empty offices there are at our headquarters building. And there's a lot of people at the Game Commission who are hunters. But nonetheless, though, our role is beyond that. We have to think long term. We have to be making changes. And a lot of times internally, we'll say, as a hunter, I'd rather we do this. But when I separate myself from a hunter and talk as a Game Commission employee who's got to be thinking 20 years down the road, 50 years down the road, 100 years down the road, reluctantly, I think this is the right path. And because of that, though, there is some tension sometimes. We recognize it. Internally, there's tension between us. Again, sometimes we think, I got to take my hunter hat off now and think about what's in the best interest long term. So again, it comes down to just making sure that we can explain that to our hunters, because I think a lot of our hunters at their core, same thing. They want to make sure we're doing the best thing. Obviously, in the short term, we always care about the upcoming season, but at the same time, we're also thinking long term. We want to make sure that we're passing this on. So happy to have this conversation with you, and thanks again for the invite.
Yeah, and that's like me personally seeing it. So when I started, I think it was 2003 or 2004, I think was my first hunting season when I was 12. So I'll be 33 here next month. But when I started that, to see even from that point till today, the quality of hunting, I think you guys have done a great job as far as not just saying, bigger rack deer or anything, but just overall the experience of hunting through, bear, turkey, deer, across the board. Wildlife, I feel like it's been, and forest management, I throw that in there as well. And I think that has been awesome to be able to see that as those changes. And there's been a lot of decisions, I feel like, in that time frame that were highly questioned at the beginning of it. The antler restrictions, that was one that I think is was highly attested at one point, that I'm really thankful for today. And so it's I wanted to put that out there from myself that spends a lot of time in the woods, and my family that does, and a lot of people that I know around. It's definitely the quality of the experience has gotten better.
I appreciate you saying that. I'm glad you feel that way, and I think, obviously I'm biased, I get that, but I can say in all honesty that it's something that we take really seriously, and we are committed to it as an agency as a whole. And I think that we hear that from our hunters from time to time, appreciate that input, and even nationally. I can say in all honesty, we're recognized as one of the leaders in the country when it comes to wildlife management. We have the resources that we put behind it. We have the expertise. The envy of a lot of states, certainly when it comes to our hunter numbers, the land mass that we have in Pennsylvania, the number of game lands that we have, over 1.5 million acres. It's allowed us to do a lot of things with wildlife management and a lot of hunting opportunities, and I'm glad that you're seeing that on the ground.
Yeah, definitely. It's that to me, it's been great to be able to see that. And as before we talk about any specific changes here in 2025 or anything, I kind of want to give everyone an understanding on how you talked about long-term vision, but how the Game Commission as a whole makes decisions. What is there an ethos, or almost is it wildlife that's thinking of wildlife beyond everything else? Is there kind of a conglomerate of things? How do you go about making a decision?
Yeah, that's a great question, because what we do is we're always trying to balance. We're always trying to balance competing factors sometimes to make the best decisions that we can long term. And a lot of that involves what the team that our biologists do. They are always studying, researching wildlife, looking at harvest data, collecting all the different pieces of information that they can to see the health of our wildlife populations, right? We want to know, we talked about earlier where years ago we were shooting deer, about the size of a German Shepherd. Those weren't really healthy animals. Now we're seeing a lot older deer, bigger bodies, more healthier animals. That's our goal, is across the board to make sure that the 480 species of wildlife that we're responsible for, that their health is one of the primary factors that we take into consideration. Then we look at the impact that the wildlife's having. In a perfect world, that would be all we focus on, is just the wildlife itself. But in a state of 13 million people, you also have to consider the impact that wildlife had. A lot of times, when you're talking impact, I'll come back to deer, because deer, have that ability. They impact the forest, and, in some areas of the state where agriculture is big, they're impacting, the ability for those individuals to maintain their livelihood. So we have to take that into consideration. Mm-hmm. So we're bringing in all these factors, and our job as staff is to then present that information to our Board of Commissioners. And we have 9 members of our board. They are appointed by the governor, confirmed by the state Senate, and then their ultimate job is to take this information that we present to them and make the decisions. And that's they go through a 2-step process. It starts in January. We as staff provide them with our recommendations based on the data that we have. They make an initial determination, and then in April they come back and they finalize that vote, and that sets the seasons for the upcoming year. And for us internally, as soon as they make that vote in April, we start that clock over again and start preparing for next year. So it's a constant process, again, of gathering information, hearing from different factions on the scientific side as well as the social side, being able to provide that to our board and let them make the decisions that they feel are in the best interest of hunting and wildlife.
Yeah, and that's what I kind of figured, that it was a mixture of things, because, just thinking about it from the wildlife perspective, when you have this many people,
yeah.
I mean, does Pennsylvania have the most licensed hunters, or is Texas?
Texas
above?
is still number one, but that doesn't count. They're a whole separate country.
Yeah.
That's a different world down there.
Yeah.
Other than Texas, we we still have about 1 million hunters in Pennsylvania, not all of whom buy licenses every year. So our license sales are around 850,000. We're getting ready to end the license year. We're going to be just over 840,000, which, again, other than Texas, most states can't fathom having that number of hunters. So the hunting culture in Pennsylvania is certainly alive and well.
Yeah, that's for certain. What are you seeing as far as trends with the hunting license numbers?
Yeah, very positive, and we're doing something right in Pennsylvania. There's no doubt about it. The numbers were on a decline. Let me back up a little bit. So we hit our peak around 1982, 83. We were about 1.3 million licenses sold, which is an insane amount of hunters every year to sell that amount of licenses. So that was the peak. Since then, we've been on a decline, and that's not just Pennsylvania. Like, that's national.
Yeah, that's nationwide.
And what's interesting too is everybody hit their peak in that early '80s timeframe, and just started going downward since then. So our rate of decline has varied throughout the year, or throughout the years since then. We were losing hunters at a real fast pace up until about 5-6 years ago, at which point the license sales have really plateaued, and the rate of decline has slowed down incredibly. So we're doing things well in Pennsylvania to have that. This year we'll probably be we'll be at a decrease this year, but it'll be roughly around 1%, maybe even less than 1%. If you look at the national average, it's closer to 3-4%.
Okay.
So a lot of factors going into that. You had things like COVID, which brought a lot of hunters back. But also there's been a lot of extended seasons. Certainly talk about that with bear, archery. That's definitely helped for some hunters. Sunday hunting, getting that for a couple days has been huge. And of course, the board made a change to allow a Saturday start to deer season. So is it any one of those factors? I don't know. Is it all of them combined? Probably. But, whatever the cause may be, things are pretty positive in Pennsylvania. Again, to have the number of hunters that we have and to have that slow of a decline, in fact, really a plateau, is pretty good. It makes us the envy of a lot of other states.
Yeah. The thing about, the decline, I mean, is it mostly seeing it in like younger generations? Is that kind of That's
a big part of it. What you're seeing is obviously we're losing those older hunters. They're just aging out, saying, I'm not going to continue. The alarming thing, again, for us and for everybody else, is we're not gaining hunters at the same rate that we were losing those older hunters. So you're not going to get that, 1-for-1 kind of thing. And we're losing slightly more than we're gaining. But again, everybody is, a lot of factors involved there. What you're really seeing is that baby boomer generation starting to age out of hunting. And when they were active is in those early 80s. That was the peak when hunting was huge, when we were seeing young hunters come in, and that older generation, those baby boomers were hunting, like, again, to hit 1.2, 1.3 million licenses. And now that decline is definitely happening, but very positive for us that we've slowed that rate of decline.
And is your working solution, sounds like at least one of them is different seasons, extending seasons, things like that. Are there other things that are factors or something that you're working on, or is that kind of the main goal? Yeah,
that is the main goal, because we've done a ton of work on this. And again, I don't know any other state that's looked into this question as much as we have. Why are those hunter numbers declining, and what can we do about it? And it's critically important for us as an agency, because that's our funding source. We're different than most state agencies. When the state goes through its budget process, we don't get general tax dollars. For us, we need hunters. Hunters they're our lifeblood. That's how we manage wildlife. That's how we sustain ourselves as an agency. So we've done a ton of work at how we can recruit and keep hunters. And when you ask them, and it's not unique to Pennsylvania, but the number one reason why people drop off is time. So obviously, as an agency, we can't create more time, but what we can do is lengthen some seasons, make it easier for people to participate. Start those seasons on a Saturday. Allow a season to roll over for a Saturday and Sunday before it ends. Those kind of things. Playing around with the time, expanding it when people are more available, it seems to be working. We're getting more people out there.
So I have to bring this up about Sundays. So, because I see this all the time, and I know the answer to this, but I want you to explain it. Sunday hunting, why don't you just open it up to the entire state?
Man, we'd love nothing more. And you're right, we get that question all the time. It's, if you ever check our Facebook page,
I see it.
It doesn't matter what the post is. the top 3 comment is going to be, what about Sundays? This is great, but give us Sundays. We would love to. Within the way we're structured in Pennsylvania, our board sets regulations, but ultimately, though, there is a statute, the Game and Wildlife Code, that controls and supersedes even our regulations. That's the ultimate authority, basically, when it comes to hunting. And there is a section within the law, that Game and Wildlife Code, that says hunting on Sundays is prohibited. Now, a few years ago, we were able to kind of crack that ceiling a little bit and create an exception, which is on 3 days there at the beginning of firearms deer season, the end of the archery season, and for bear season. So we got 3 days, and those are 3 big days from a participation standpoint. So we got that. Now the second challenge and the ultimate challenge is going to be just removing that whole prohibition on Sunday hunting so that our board can set seasons for 7 days a week. And you said it earlier in the podcast, change comes a little slowly to Pennsylvania. We are one of the outliers when it comes to this. It's definitely, for us, the holy grail really is to change that, to let us have full Sunday hunting, because I would love nothing more from a staff perspective than to give our board recommendations where there's seasons that include Sundays.
Yeah, I see it all the time in the comments, and honestly, probably until, I don't know, maybe 2018, I think, really, when I started this podcast, and I did an interview with Brian Burhans prior, and he had mentioned that. I didn't know. I thought it was the Game Commission that made that rule. So yeah, just wanted to add that point. I actually had that in my notes to make sure that I specifically asked you that. But
I appreciate you bringing it up and helping provide that clarity. And certainly, I can't, blame a hunter if you're just, it just you would think, right? It's counterintuitive to think that it's actually the law that's prohibiting Sunday hunting. You just would think it'd be the Game Commission.
Yeah.
So to the extent that we can help get that word out, because ultimately the legislature has the power to change that law, and they came really close last year. I'm hoping this year we can get that across the finish line. But nothing would help more than if the elected officials heard from their constituents, heard from those hunters who don't want to be inside on a Sunday. And it never fails, right? Like, be it turkey season or be it in the rut, like Saturday's a mess. A weather front comes through, it rains, and it's done that like just about every Saturday this turkey season. And then you wake up Sunday and it's this beautiful day, and you're just like, I can't believe I can't be out there.
Yeah.
So if we could get more hunters to, let their legislator know, hey, we want to hunt on Sundays like they do in most states. That is what would get the ball across the finish line, and we're really hoping that happens.
Yeah, I feel like the best cold fronts hit on Sundays during archery season. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me.
I mean, I love football, but I'd rather be out hunting than watching football. Give us that chance. And this past year, I was out for junior turkey season, and it rained. And it was my youngest. It was his last chance to hunt, and the rain totally screwed us up. Woke up Sunday, beautiful day. It's just like that hurt. That hurt.
Yeah.
So.
Oh no, that makes sense. It's but it sounds like things are still moving in a positive direction to hopefully seeing that as a change.
I've never been more optimistic, and dare I say that the conversation has shifted from if there'll be Sunday hunting to when there'll be Sunday hunting. And when I started, it was very much if. Like, it was in doubt. I wasn't sure if it would ever happen. But in the past couple of years, there's been a ton of momentum behind it.
Yeah.
We've seen a lot of groups come together, and really a coalition, essentially, because we have the hunting groups and now even the Pennsylvania Farm Bureau, which for years was against Sunday hunting. Even now, they have come out and made it a priority bill for them to get Sunday hunting.
Really?
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Right. So we got groups on both ends of the spectrum saying, hey, let's have Sunday hunting. And, from the Farm Bureau's perspective, completely understand. It gets more hunters onto their property, removing deer from eating their crop.
Crop damage, yeah.
Exactly. So now you just met with them earlier this week. They are all on board, and they're making a push to get Sunday hunting repealed as well. So when you have hunters and farmers working together on an issue, again, I think the conversation has changed from if to when, and we'd love nothing more for it to be this year. So fingers crossed.
Yeah. So who's the opposition at this point?
It really comes down to that tradition, and there are just some who just feel like, that should be a day of rest. That's a day for in church. We don't want people out hunting, and maybe private landowners who's like, the last thing I want is somebody else It's okay with them on a Saturday, but I really want to be left alone for a Sunday. And we recognize that. I mean, that's part of it in a state our size. As many, 85% of the land is privately held, so there are going to be some private landowners just like, I just want to be left alone on Sunday. I absolutely get that, and I absolutely respect their right if we get Sunday hunting to say no hunting on Sundays on my property. That would potentially be the solution, but there's certainly, as you said, change comes slowly to Pennsylvania. We're having great discussions about it. I'm optimistic that the day will come, for us, for my kids, where they'll look back and be like, can you imagine that there used to be a time when nobody hunted on Sundays? Like, I'm looking forward to them thinking it's crazy that used to be the case.
Yeah. Oh, that's great to be able to hear. What about access? Is that something that comes up at all from through your data or anything for reasons people aren't hunting anymore?
I can't say that we have too much data on that. I think it's kind of time is the number one reason. And then listed underneath that, there are other things. And, no doubt access is a big part of it. When you have the ability to get onto a property and then show up next year and it's closed, for some individuals, that absolutely impacts their ability to go hunting and their extent to which they participate. But at the end of the day, time, there's no getting around it. Time is the biggest limiting factor for people when they make that decision. And, for those of us who live hunting 365, 24/7, I think sometimes we forget that there's a lot of people who, as it gets to November, to the end of November, they sit down and they make a decision whether or not they're going to hunt that year. And, we see it all the time. We sell licenses at our headquarters, and there's people coming in, and I'm thinking, man, the season's like 2 days away. You're just now thinking about, I buy my license first morning, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, there are people who just are really that hard up for time, for free time. And, it's things like school, it's things like work, it's things like family. And they look, like I said, look at that week ahead and have to make a decision if they're going to get out or not. And as busy as we all are with all the commitments that we have, some people just make the decision, I can't swing it this year. And that's what we see. That's when we see people stop hunting. And that's, obviously for us, that's the worst case scenario, because then once you stop once, it's easier to stop, successive years, and then you're no longer bringing your kids with you or anything like that. So we need those people engaged, and it all comes down to opportunity.
Yeah, I see the one thing, and it's Pennsylvania is on the lower side of this compared to other states, but is access being an issue with land being leased or mostly land being leased. I'd say is probably the biggest thing that I've seen, which we have so much public land that it definitely helps a lot. But I know even in the area that I live in, there's a lot of timber company properties, gas company property, stuff that was open to public hunting in the past that are now leased up, and it's pushing people to more of the public land spots. I wouldn't say that it's necessarily a problem at this point, but it's definitely something you're seeing more of a trend of, where someone has always hunted this piece, or even say their neighbor's back 40 and they were always able to hunt it, and now that's becoming leased. But one thing that I saw that was a positive, and maybe you'll be able to help me with the numbers on this, but there was like a couple of game lands, especially in like the elk range, that had opened up in the last 5 years or so.
Yeah. Yep.
Is that something that you look at doing more of, or is that still something that's like a priority too? Yeah,
no, I think you made a lot of great points. And just as you were talking, I was thinking about, you asked me about my background, and I grew up hunting, and I don't remember ever, as horrible as it is, I don't remember really knocking on doors. It was just kind of like, of course you can hunt here. Maybe my dad probably got permission decades ago, and just, but we would go from property line to property line. Like, we crossed probably like 3 or 4 people's property. And sure, at the end of the year, you'd bring them some deer meat if you were lucky enough to get one. But it was just understood that, where there was woods, of course you can go hunt them. And now I'm willing to bet that if I was to go down there, purple paint everywhere.
Yeah.
So access, absolutely has changed over the past couple of decades, and it is pushing more people to public land. And that's why we're so fortunate in Pennsylvania, to have 1.5 million acres of game lands on top of, I believe it's 2.5, close to it, million acres of state forest.
Yeah.
For Pennsylvania hunters who have the ability to get to those locations and willing to walk a little bit, you can still find some really good hunting spots. And you're right, we were able to purchase a nice tract of land just outside of Benazet. I want to say 2-3 years ago. I was up here last week for a different reason, and I drove by it, and sure enough, like every access spot, there was a truck. So hunters have absolutely found it already, and are using it, and that's what we want. So anytime we can make those kind of acquisitions, create more opportunities for hunters. Sometimes it's a big chunk of land like that. Sometimes, though, it's just getting an access point. Down where I hunt, we have a big game lands, or down where I live and do a lot of my hunting, I should say, we had a big game lands where we had a kind of handshake deal where we could get in there as the game commission and hunters could access it. Well, it changed hands. The new owner said, I'm not letting anybody come through my road. So we then bought land on the other side of the mountain, and now it creates that access point and opens up hundreds of acres. So just by making that acquisition means hunters are going to have a lot more opportunities. And me personally, I'm looking forward to getting out there this fall. So, we're always very aggressive in looking for ways that we can get either parts of lands or access right-of-ways to other parts of lands because our hunters need it, and it's a big part of our culture in Pennsylvania. It's something, again, that kind of sets us apart from a lot of other states, particularly on the East Coast.
Is there any way of, like, even say you couldn't totally acquire a property, of like incentives for landowners to allow public hunting? Is that something that's already out there, or something that you guys look at?
It's not yet, but we are, as far as the incentives, it's something that we're given a lot of consideration to. Now, we do have a cooperative program, we call it, where landowners who want hunters on their property reach out to us, and we're actually upgrading our mapping system to really identify those parcels. That's something I'm really excited about, get hunters out to those areas where, again, landowners voluntarily say, hey, I want to be enrolled in this. A lot of times, obviously, it's farmers. I want some more hunters out here. So, keep checking on our website. Look for that to be rolled out over the next year to really provide those access points to our hunters and show them exactly where they are. But as far as incentivizing it, that's something we talked about. Haven't gone down that road yet, but one thing I want us to be as an agency is be adaptive. And if the day comes where we need to look into that as well, be it in the form of credits or tax credits or whatever it may be, to open up that land for hunting so that we can get hunters in there and again, it comes back to deer a lot of times, help those landowners with deer problems, then that's something that should be on the table as well.
Yeah, because I would imagine that turkeys aren't making as much of an impact on the land. Bears maybe. But
bears,
bears,
they were.
Definitely.
Yeah, definitely.
So that was something that's something I've definitely noticed of a lot more properties. I mean, even in the last few years, I've noticed places that I've hunted in the past that were open to public hunting, that were privately owned, that have, all of a sudden there's posted signs on them and with a lease name or whatever else. And like I said, we are lucky with Pennsylvania having so much public land, but does it come to a point where to try to control the deer population, we need to increase the amount of hunters. Now that becomes more people on smaller places, and then the experience declines for those people that are hunting there. So that's kind of why I brought that up.
No, and it's a great subject, and it's a challenge that we have that every state's dealing with. And as you were talking, I was thinking back to a number of farms I went out to this year and met with the landowner, and so that they could show me some of the damage and some of the deer are causing, some of the problems they're having. And we all recognized it because we'd be standing there in the field, just mowed down. But then this parcel over here is completely off limits to hunting. And then this one over here is leased, and the land, the guys in that lease, only want to shoot 4.5-year-old buck or older. And the farmer's really frustrated because he said, the deer are out there during the daylight hours, but then they come to my property to get fat and get big, and then they go back over there. So, what's the solution to that? Particularly when you're talking about private property rights. Those individuals have the ability to limit access as they see fit.
Yep.
But the deer don't understand private property boundaries, and they crisscross and go onto that farmer's field and mow down his soybeans and then go over here during the daylight hours. So it's a problem. It's one that all states are dealing with. And if we're going to really manage wildlife moving forward, it's something that we have to continually look for solutions on.
Yeah, that was one thing. One of my good friends is a forestry consultant and works, a lot of his clients are some of these bigger timber company properties and stuff. And a lot of those properties get leased up, and controlling those deer populations on those properties, especially large chunks where you have, I don't know, just say 10 people that would lease this out, and they're there hunting bucks for the most part,
Right.
and not shooting enough does to totally manage it. And it's like that property can be absolutely, and my eyes were open to this so I do a scouting camp every spring where I bring a bunch of people in, and there's multiple presenters teaching people how to scout in the big woods and find deer. And we use some of these private property pieces. I can't take anybody to any of my spots, you know?
Of course not.
But so we go and look at it, and being able to see the damage that overpopulation of deer is doing to the regeneration of these forests and these different spots. But you could go 5 miles down the road, and the deer population is a third of that, you know? And that was just something that I feel like it's got to be hard from a game commission standpoint to put these rules and regulations in place for, say, a WMU when there's like so much micro managing within it.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, there's hot spots and there's cold spots.
Yeah.
Right. And your perspective of the deer population depends on which of those spots you're in.
Yeah.
And if you're a cold spot, you're hunting in a cold spot, you're convinced that there's no deer left in the whole WMU.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. You might go 10 miles down the road to somebody, where the forestry conditions are different, where the habitat's there, and they're, picking and choosing which deer to shoot. And that's the challenge that we always face at the Game Commission, because there's no way for every hunter, everybody to be on the same page and have the same level of satisfaction at the end of the season. Yep. And that's the challenge for us. And you nailed it on the head, is making sure, though, that we're doing the right thing for current and future generations, understanding that there's going to be opinions are going to vary, right? And it's going to vary depending on where you are. And if you're in a hot spot or a cold spot, it really colors your view of how we're doing as an agency.
Yeah, I've learned that is one of the more controversial topics. I'll say something that I didn't think that was never meant to be a statement that was, I'd be like, some of these areas I hunt are lower deer density. I say lower deer densities. And then I'll get comments of people, Pennsylvania has way too many deer, or this person's like, there's no deer. And it's like, it's all what you're seeing in your where you're hunting at, totally. Essentially. And the way I've looked at it is there are areas where I believe that the populations are struggling a little bit, but then when I'm filling my doe tags, I just go to one of the areas that I know have higher, and trying to, because I think, and maybe you think differently, but as hunters, especially, I know not everyone can spend as much time out in the woods as I do, so I'm very understanding of that. But if you do have a recognition of that, or you think something's too low, maybe you don't shoot, a couple deer here, and you'd go to a different area. I don't know. I think it does come down to you as an individual as well, of recognizing those patterns and being a positive change in what you think is a positive change.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And I think we certainly respect the right of every hunter to make that decision. Mm-hmm. And if they're hunting in an area where they feel like, I don't want to shoot a doe here, don't shoot a doe there, because I guarantee you there's some places where you can go, and maybe it's a farmer down the road from where you live where he'd appreciate it if you shot a doe there.
Yeah.
So if you want to make that decision individually as a hunter and say, I'm going to decide, where I fill my tag based on how I feel, at that moment when I pull the trigger, we certainly respect your right to do so. And at the same time, respect somebody's right who wants to shoot a doe in an area where you feel like, they shouldn't. That's, as a hunters, we all have to make that decision individually. Mm-hmm. But, for those who want to shoot a doe, want to fill that antlerless tag, or maybe multiple, I'll tell you what, I've talked to a lot of farmers this year who would really appreciate the opportunity to have some hunters on their property. So that's something we're going to make a real point of emphasis at the Game Commission, is linking up those farmers who have deer problems. And you talked about, too, the deer impact on the forestry as well.
Yeah. And,
that's where our DMAP program comes into effect, the Deer Management Assistant Program. I spent a good bit of time talking to the foresters this spring, looking at some of the changes that our board made to that program, what the impact are going to be. And again, it goes back to those hot spots and cold spots. But if you talk to, be it a farmer or be it to a forester, they're going to tell you there's some hot spots where, mm-hmm. You probably could feel pretty confident pulling a trigger on a doe.
Yeah. What is, I was going to ask that. How, you said Deer Management Assistant Program is DMAP.
DMAP.
What constitutes or creates a DMAP area?
Sure. So from the 10,000 foot view, we manage deer based on WMUs, wildlife management units, right? 2G, 2F, wherever you may be. But we recognize inside of it, we talk about hot spots and cold spots. There could be some hot spots where that landowner says, you might have allocated 40,000 tags for your unit. However, that's not getting the job done on my property, and I'd like to see more antlerless deer being harvested. So they have the ability to apply through our website. There's the application form. They have the ability to apply to enter our Deer Management Assistance Program, DMAP as we call it. And what that does is that lets that landowner get additional coupons that then they can give to hunters, who then can redeem them to kill additional antlerless deer. So it's designed to be targeted to those hotspots for those landowners who have problem. Maybe they're not getting the regeneration that they want. That's probably the number one reason for DMAP that it's being utilized, and it's another tool to get hunters out onto those properties and address the deer populations on those areas.
Yeah, and that's not only private land.
It's not only private land. Right. Originally it was, if I recall correctly. However, it's been expanded. So DCNR. The ANF, you have some of those areas that are public land, but still enrolled in the DMAP program. And even at the Game Commission, we started enrolling some of our game lands in the DMAP program. Okay. So public landowners can avail themselves to that program as well.
Yeah, that was something that I don't know when that had necessarily changed, but I didn't realize that until, I don't know, it was a few years ago. I feel like I recognized that there was public land areas that did enroll in that. And for the most part, I mean, especially some of the large private tracts that I've hunted that are open to public hunting, that are DMAP areas, there's a good reason for having it, that you'll see higher populations, and noticing those clear cuts taking longer to regenerate, and just the forest to regenerate. And also, again, with having a good friend who's a forester and being able to explain it to me better, of like, I just ask him questions all the time. Yeah. Me selfishly from a deer hunting perspective, but like, why is, the beech taking over versus some of these other ones that you're trying to grow in there? It's like, well, deer don't like browsing on beech, but they love the tulip, poplar, maple, and some of the other ones that we're trying to regenerate. So it makes it difficult. Yeah,
totally. And I'm right there with you as a deer hunter myself. Like, I've got to spend a good bit of time with our forester in the north for the north central region this spring. In fact, I was thinking I spent more time with him than I did turkey hunting this year. So my priorities might be way off, but I got to spend a day and a half with him looking at that regeneration, because that's what it comes down to. Mm-hmm. And he took me to one section. It's just this classic, like, we did a clear cut there, I want to say 5 years ago. And on this side of the road, we just clear cut it and left it. On this side of the road, we fenced it. And the difference is night and day. Like, you would not believe that they were done at the same time. On the side of the road that wasn't fenced, just nothing's growing. Everything's been mowed down. Then you look at the fence, and it's this lush, regenerating forest. It's got all those species that are so hard. You got oak trees coming up, and it's like, that's what's the one thing that's different? Everything else is constant. It's the deer numbers. And even in that fenced-in area, when we were walking through it, we saw deer tracks. So deer have they're in there. We're not managing for zero deer. There's still deer impacting, but nothing like the outside of the fence where they were just mowed down. And then we spent some time looking at a cut from, I want to say 2010, maybe around that time frame. And back then, the deer numbers were lower, and that cut was able to regenerate on its own without a fence. So you see firsthand the impact that deer are having on the ground. And like, as a hunter myself, grew up, the woods all look the same to me. But when you spend some time with a forester, and by the way, there's no better hunters than a forester, I would say. And this guy would certainly live up to that, where you can see where deer are, and there's a reason why they're there, and the impact that they're having. And it was eye-opening. So I'm glad that you're getting a chance to do some of that as well.
Yeah, I'm actually going to be doing some more projects and educational content around the forest management side of things with my buddy, and having him go through these different things, and even helping people understand what the paint means and on the trees, so they can understand when things are going to be cut and,
Right.
and looking at it. But I always joke with him when an area, especially when I know that he manages, and I'll send it to him if it's not regenerating good. I'll be like, "What?" I said, "Like, you did a terrible job here, man." And he'll be like, "There's too many deer," and he'd show me about like looking at a tree that's 3 foot tall and be like, "How old do you think this tree is?" I was like, "I don't know, a sapling." He's like, "No, that's a 7-year-old tree." And I was like, what? And he showed me how you can see where it was nipped off and it would start to grow again, and it'd be nipped off again. And it's trying to grow, but not totally able to.
Yeah, it sounds like I almost feel like you've been right there with me going through, because that's exactly what my forester has been showing me in that area where you're looking at something, you're like, oh, I don't know, it was a year or two old. And it's like, no, you can see all those damage points where it got browsed year after year.
Yep.
And then at some point, they're just not going to grow. Like they've been browsed to the point where, it's wasted, all of that effort. So, but then when you see the inside of a fence and it's this lush vegetation, you wouldn't think that there's any way you're looking at the same area. And you see firsthand that deer, they have an impact on the landscape. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, and the thing too, like I said, the deer population stuff, especially in the area that I've grown up in and spent time around, that's a hot topic about there's with low deer density and we need to have more deer. But I just go back to, I think maybe I hit it at a good point too, where I got to see it as its lowest levels and then also as it's was coming back up, but also seeing just the benefits of the forest, the habitat. We talked about that, but also again the health of the deer when you have them and when they don't have the available food, and if you're chasing big bucks, they have good food, they're gonna go to their bodies and then be able to grow larger antlers as well. So it's, if you look at it from that perspective too, having those having a balanced herd is a good thing.
Yeah, you said it exactly. It's that balance, right? Like that's what we're trying to do. We certainly want our hunters to be satisfied. We want them to have a good experience. Want them filling those tags where they can. But also we want to make sure that we're managing deer responsibly so that forest can regenerate, which in turn means the deer are still going to be there 20, 40, 50 years down the road. So finding that balance is where, that's our focus. That's what our job is to do.
Yeah. I was just talking to my dad about this the other day, and I was saying, I said, in a lot of the areas I hunt, again, my tunnel vision on the areas that I hunt, I said, I feel like deer numbers are at a really good spot. I don't want to see them get any higher. Like I'm not going as many days without seeing a deer in a tree as I used to, but I know there's a lot more deer than what there was even 10 years ago, or I shouldn't say a lot more, but a good number more. But I don't want to see it get any higher. It's at a good level, and that's from a management perspective, that's super difficult. It's not like you can just be like, oh, let's just hold that number, right here.
You're exactly right. That's something that, I've definitely seen where you'd love to think that it's here, it stays here, it's static, nothing changes. In reality, it's a pendulum. Be it for deer, be it really for anything. Like we're seeing that with bear as well. Like that pendulum is constantly swinging. The goal is to try to get it center as long as possible, close to center, thereabouts. But it's going to peak and it's going to swing back. And, when deer numbers are low, what happens? The habitat regenerates, which means the deer numbers go up, which means they got to be brought back down. Like it's a constant pendulum swinging back and forth. There never is just that perfect ideal. Here we are, we nailed it, nothing changes. That's not reality. What reality is that back and forth, trying to get it as close to center as possible. Looking at what those trends are long term, looking what those impacts are going to be. But it's the constant back and forth. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah. And while we're on that topic, that's one of the changes for 2025 was if you want to explain the DMAP, the extended season, explain a little bit what that is and why that came about.
Right. So that was a proposal that our board put on moved through the meeting in April. And I talked about how there's the two meetings. The April meeting finalizes everything. So as they were going through the seasons and bag limits at the April meeting, the motion was made to expand the DMAP season into the late season, and we've had this late season. It's kind of new, but we've had it in DMAP in CWD areas, kind of in the central part of the state, and we had it in the southeast. There was a DMAP area there where we found CWD, so we did a late season, and the board made the decision to move and create a late season. So it's after Christmas, right away after Christmas, for about a month time frame, a late season firearms season on DMAP properties. So it's not statewide, it's not everywhere, it's only on DMAP properties. So for those who get that DMAP tag or able to redeem it, that coupon, they're going to have the ability to hunt with a firearm after Christmas, again, in through January. So anytime you do something for the first time, it's always unknown what that impact is going to be. Mm-hmm. Certainly for a late season firearm, a late after Christmas firearm season, there's a ton of factors that are at play that we don't know what that impact is going to be. It's going to be, I think, very weather dependent. After Christmas, there's the chance for, you don't know what you're getting, right? It might be -10 and snow and sleet, and participation might be very low, or the conditions might be great. You get a fresh coating of snow and it's mild, then participation is going to be high. So always an unknown for a first season. Based on the limited data that we have, based on how those extended seasons have gone so far, we're anticipating that we harvest anywhere from about 6,000 to 10,000 additional deer statewide through that DMAP season. But that, again, that's just a projection based on limited data.
Yep.
What that means as far as term of DMAP as a whole is, if you look over the past couple of years, we're shooting through DMAP less than 15,000 deer a year. It's coming in around just over 14,000 deer. So is there a chance that through that extended season, we'll probably add statewide another 6,000 to 10,000? Potentially. I think that's probably a reasonable expectation. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's reasonable to expect we'll double the harvest or anything like that. But again, even if we did, the statewide DMAP would still make up less than 30,000 deer out of the total harvest last year. That was about 470,000. So it's not something that has a big statewide impact. Can it impact deer populations locally where it's being used? Absolutely. There's no doubt about that. But when you look at our total harvest, DMAP only makes up a small percentage of it.
Okay. And what was the reasoning for the time of the year?
We've done surveys in the past, particularly when we were looking at those CWD units, about when hunters would want to hunt if we were to move outside that framework of, the traditional seasons. And the number one response was that hunters indicated they would participate if there was a late season, which makes sense. You look at when our seasons come in, not too many people want to be out there in September before those, the seasons traditionally come in. September, even October recently has been pretty warm. You're racing against the clock if you get a deer down. So the surveys that we've done, where we asked hunters if there was to be additional season opportunities, which would you prefer? The late after Christmas season was what hunters said they would prefer. Now, there's always a difference, though, between saying that you're going to do something and actually doing it, which is another unknown that we're going to really be looking at this year, is what is that participation like? Mm-hmm. Are hunters really going to go out after Christmas and harvest additional deer? These are all unknowns that we're going to be tracking very closely, at the end of this year. Again, looking at participation, does weather play a role? So do hunters really, maybe they thought they would go out after Christmas, and then after Christmas comes, they're like, well, my freezer's already full. I don't even want to go out.
Yeah.
Like, those are all things that we don't know yet, but we're going to be monitoring very closely and, have more data on by the end of the year, and certainly or early of next year.
Yeah. I'm surprised to see that people would have voted for that time with the weather and everything else that it comes with it. Personally, like, if it were up to me, and this is Beau's world that he was living in, seeing like a September archery season of, say, 7 days, it seems like archery participation is up higher from a doe. For me to shoot more does, because I'm one of those people that I have a goal of shooting a doe early in the bow season every year, and I can't get myself to do it because I'm chasing bucks, and I always think that I might screw it up and there might be a buck coming through, and I do think a lot of hunters think that way, and it's like having a doe only. It's like, okay, I know I could get my get something in the freezer there in September earlier. Seems like those deer aren't pressured at all yet, would be an opportunity, and then basically kind of right after our normal gun season of like 3 days or something, like how it used to be on the end of it. And I'm not saying that of like, one of those guys of this is how it used to be. It was
Right.
great. But, looking at it from that perspective, my biggest fear with the one after Christmas is, well, there's two things. One is the tradition of flintlock. And I do understand, again, this is only DMAP areas.
Right.
But the tradition of flintlock, if that'll change where, are you going to have to wear orange now if you're hunting in a DMAP area with flintlock and that tradition of just, old style as far as either bow hunting or with a flintlock muzzleloader. And then also bucks that have shed their antlers already being shot for does.
Right.
It seems like in the areas that I spend a lot of time in, a lot of those older age class deer are losing their antlers in December and January now. That and maybe it's always been that way, and that's just what I'm seeing more of, but of that being impacted as well.
Yeah, those are two things that we're, like I said, going to be monitoring closely as well to see what the data shows. Do hunters participate like we thought they would, and then what, in fact, are they harvesting? And that's, questions that I think everybody has at this time. From the board's perspective, they were willing to take the step and make this change now and accept that unknown because of what they've been hearing about the deer impacts on the forest regeneration. They thought we're in a point where it's time to make a change, see how it works, analyze that data. And it might be, when it's all said and done, maybe that early September timeframe, because that's something that's been talked about as well. Maybe that is going to be the preferred route because maybe hunters just aren't participating after Christmas. We'll see. I think there's a lot of potential options that are going to be considered over the next couple of years as we have a growing deer population in some areas, as CWD continues to spread, as we see impact to forest regeneration. Those are all things that are going to be talked about. For this year, this is, with the direction that the board wanted to go. So we'll analyze the data, provide them with the results, and see how it worked.
And is that something? So it sounds like, based on what you're saying, this is kind of a trial thing and something that's not a set in stone from here on forward sort of deal.
I think that's absolutely the point. And in some of those areas that have been DMAP'd, I know one in particular, it's been DMAP'd for, I want to say 15 years. And it's a public land DMAP. And yet if they still can't get the regeneration that they want after 15 years, it's like something needs to change.
Yeah.
What's that definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over again and thinking something's going to change?
Yep.
You have to try something different. If they're not getting the regeneration to the point that they need to stay in DMAP for year after year after year, there's a problem, because DMAP was never designed to be permanent. DMAP was always designed to address those hotspots, reduce the deer populations in those areas, and then come out of the program. And there have been some properties that were on private and public land where they've been able to take them out of the program. That's the goal of DMAP. Nobody from a landowner wants to be in DMAP long term. But almost by definition, that means you got a deer population problem. So if this extended season has the intended effect of removing those deer out of those hot spots, and that landowner comes back on and says, actually, we're good now, I'm not going to be enrolled in the program anymore, then it was a success.
Yep.
So that's the direction that we're going to go for this year. Okay.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I appreciate you explaining that and going through it. I had heard, I don't remember where I heard it, but it was someone within the Game Commission had spoke one time saying it's more difficult to remove seasons versus adding to it, just because of the from the public. It's just harder to pull that stuff away. Is that something that you see?
Yes and no. I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think anytime, it doesn't take long for, as much as we are traditionalists, and there's no doubt about that, it doesn't take long for a new season to take root and be like, well, this is the new normal. We're doing this now.
Yep.
But nonetheless, if we're doing our job right, we're managing those populations. And I talked about, the pendulum swinging back and forth. We're seeing where it's at. Then we have to be able to pull some seasons back. And one example that I use is you look at what's happening this year with bear. So go back a couple of years ago, and you mentioned it, bear can do a lot of damage to a landowner. If you got a cornfield and, you get that older, mature male bear, he can go in there and wreak havoc to a cornfield in no time. Mm-hmm. So back 2018, 2019, we were inundated with complaints from landowners about bear problems. And also we were seeing bears in suburbia, places they had never been before, wreaking havoc on trash cans and whatnot. And it was clear that we had to do something about the bear population. It was kind of balancing it. It's not that the population was unhealthy or anything like that, but we had the human side. We had to balance that. So because of that, our board implemented a series of changes to the bear season. They did the week-long muzzleloader there in October, as well as expanding archery seasons, and archery season bear going for 3 weeks up until this year. So as a result, those seasons, again, had the intended effect. The complaints really dried up. I can't recall getting any complaint this year, maybe one or two now I think about it, about bear impact on landowners, be it suburban or be it farmers. Those complaints are nothing like they were a few years ago. What that told us is, okay, we've probably addressed the problem, and now we can pull back on some of those seasons. So that week-long muzzleloader season in October has been shortened to just 3 days. That archery season that went for 3 weeks beginning this year has been shortened to a week. So we're pulling back on those seasons. We're making adjustments. And yeah, it's always tough. Like we talked about, it's always easier, or it's hard to pull back on a season once it's out there.
Yep.
But nonetheless, when the data tells you it's the right thing to do, that's the direction you need to go. So our board has pulled back on those bear seasons. We're going to shorten them. We're going to monitor the impact that has now. If and when that bear population starts to increase, chances are we'll have to extend some of those seasons again. It's finding that sweet spot in the pendulum, adding seasons, subtracting seasons, doing what we need to do so that we can manage the species responsibly.
Yeah, and that's interesting about how those seasons had impacted things. Do you see is there a percentage as far as that muzzleloader season did really well, did the intended, or archery, or the rifle season hasn't changed in a while, has it?
It has not, other than there's some units that have that extended rifle season throughout the 2 weeks of firearms deer season. Some of those problem areas for bear.
Yeah,
but
gotcha.
The general statewide rifle season there right before Thanksgiving, that's stayed constant for decades now.
Okay.
But yeah, to your question, the muzzleloader season was absolutely impactful. It was effective. And it makes sense, right? Those muzzleloaders, your range is out there probably 100, 150 yards if you can see that far, depending on the foliage and where you're hunting.
Yep.
So that was the first one to get pulled back, and our board pulled that back, I want to say 2 years ago, took it from a week down to a couple days. I think it's that Thursday, Friday, Saturday there in mid to late October. So they pulled that one back, and now the archery season is going to be shortened as well. So the timing of those seasons, the length of those seasons, all absolutely play a role in the harvest. And again, the population seems to be at a point now where the complaints have died down, so we can let it build back up, which absolutely it will do over time. Bears are going to do what bears are going to do. That population is going to increase, and we'll just make adjustments each year as necessary, depending on where the data shows us we should be going.
Yeah, and I'm assuming with the rifle season only being, 5 days?
So it's the season? Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, right up to Thanksgiving.
Okay. Yeah. So as far as that probably has a bigger impact than the archery season, but it's short enough as it is that you didn't want to pull days off of that versus the archery. Is that?
And what's really interesting about that too is the way that season is timed. A lot of those sows have denned up at that point. So that rifle season coming in when it does, traditionally the male population, the harvest has been higher for the male bear population, which means that you can allow that harvest to continue. If you're going to impact a species, it's the female harvest that really sets the increase or decrease. So that rifle season doesn't have the impact because you're, again, traditionally shooting more males. But you look at the archery season, the muzzleloader season in October, those sows aren't denned up yet in October. In fact, they're on the move. They're looking for food. So that that season being timed when it was allowed for increase in female harvest, which then impacted that population size. So that's kind of all the things that go into setting those seasons and determining, how long they're going to be and when they are going to be. And for bear, the timing is critical as to if those sows have denned up or not.
Okay. Yeah, that was something that I'm glad you explained that as far as the sows denning up and everything. Because to me, it would be firearm season's probably having the biggest impact, just from a rifle can shoot further than a bow, and that's I'm glad you cleared that up.
And it does, but I think what matters more is whether or not, again, you're harvesting male or female.
Yeah.
And if it's the female, then you're going to see that impact eventually.
Yeah.
Because you're decreasing, she might have had 3 cubs, so you pull her out of the population. It doesn't take long to see the impact. And that's why we're making these changes with bear really in the period of less than 10 years, right? Like, so that pendulum has swung. That population has gone from peak, down to a point where now it can probably, and we're going to start to see it increase again in no time. We can make those changes pretty quickly through our board.
Yeah, and I can appreciate that from the standpoint of looking at it and making adjustments on the fly versus this is just our season. Yeah. This is what it's going to be for the next 10, 15 years. This is with being able to look at that and adjust. I can definitely appreciate that.
Yeah, that's absolutely our goal. And that's why we do the monitoring that we do. That's why we do the research that we do. That's why we do the social side, the surveys, so that when we present our board the information, again, there in January and April, we want to give them the best up-to-date information to make those decisions.
Yeah. How, with making decisions on population, what are things that come into it? It sounds like the surveys that you have to fill out after you were to harvest an animal. What other things, I guess?
I mean, it varies by species, but we certainly look at, again, the sex of the animal being harvested.
Yep.
Because if we're harvesting, a lot of females, it impacts the population more so than the males. That's a big part of it. So we look also, that's why we have check stations for bear. So we can, take their body weight, see how they're doing. Mm-hmm. For deer, we don't have the mandatory check stations, but nonetheless, our crews are out constantly they start right after the firearm seasons begin, and they're going to processors all over the state. They're pulling the teeth. You're getting the age of those deer, checking them out. So we're evaluating the size of the animal. That plays into what the health, gives us an idea of what the health of the population is.
Gotcha.
So those are all the factors from the biological side that we're looking at, again, to make those decisions or give that information to our boards where the population is as far as is it healthy or not.
How is the participation on the harvest reporting? Is that something that you feel pretty confident in when you look at those numbers?
So what we do to come up with that formula, and it's a really great system. It makes a lot of sense. Is, again, we're out there getting hands on about 20,000 deer, I want to say, going to these processors. Mm-hmm. And then we're checking up of those deer that we got hands on, how many of them were actually being reported. So that gives us a rate, an estimated harvest rate. So let's say we got hands on 10,000 deer or 20,000 deer, but only 5,000 of them were being reported. That tells us that 15,000 deer are harvested and not being reported. Now, thankfully, it's not that high, mm-hmm. but nonetheless, for us, for every other state, you deal with kind of like the unknown. What is the amount that you don't know?
Yeah.
Because what a harvest report tells you is it gives you the minimum. This is the minimum number of deer that were killed. The great unknown is how many that were killed that weren't reported, and that's what you're trying to get to. Even in a state that has a check station. And I don't know how many there are. I know there's certainly a few probably still out there. The number has decreased significantly. But even a state that has a mandatory check station, you're still not getting your hands on every deer, right?
Yeah.
There still is that unknown of how many deer are being harvested, but we're not seeing coming through. So a report card gives us that same minimum number of deer killed, and then we measure that against what the harvest rate likely is.
Yep.
Come up with our harvest estimates.
One thing I thought it was cool that West Virginia did when I was just down there turkey hunting is, well, right away after you shoot any animal there, you have to report it within 24 hours, which you do that through their check system. But then this year, for me to buy my tag, they had sent me a survey just about how the turkey hunting was,
okay.
and they had sent me it in the mail, and I got it. The problem is sometimes you get those things, you put them there like, I'll fill this out later, and I don't know if I opened it. I saw that what it was, and I hadn't opened it. Anyways, I go online to buy my tag for the year, and it said, you haven't completed this survey yet, and it had me fill it out right there. I could do it on the computer, which was nice. Do it right before I did it, so I couldn't buy that tag until I filled out that survey.
Is that right?
Yeah. It wasn't like a long, it took me 2 minutes to do this survey, but it was great questions, I thought, and I thought that was a unique way of doing it. I haven't seen that anywhere else before, but that was a unique way to help
it was mandatory. You couldn't buy the license without it.
If I remember right, I couldn't get past that page unless I was filling that out.
And that's because that's some of the challenge we used to have, and I know for DMAP in particular, it used to be and it still is, mandatory DMAP reporting, but it used to be you couldn't buy a DMAP tag if we didn't get your report from last year. Well, the number one thing people did, though, was call in and say, I put it in the mail. I promise I did. And then we ended up creating so many exceptions to it because people claimed, oh, no, I swear I returned it, that we had to do away with it because we were, you're going to take somebody at their word. If they're telling you I dropped it off in the mail and that they want to buy a tag, we created so many exceptions that we no longer made you return that survey or that harvest report in order to get a DMAP. So I'll certainly take a look at what West Virginia did and what kind of reporting they got from it, and see what kind of response they had from customers as far as if that was too much of an inconvenience or not. But if there's ways that we can improve our modeling for data, we're absolutely glad to take a look at that.
Yeah, because I don't think a lot of people are meaning to not fill out those things. I know there's a lot of times I'll be like, oh crap, I got to get this done. I got to fill this report out, and it's like right before the time when I do it, and you just forget sometimes, and that's where I think that a lot of that comes to make it easier, put it in front of your face kind of deal. That definitely helps with it. Yeah,
and we're taking a look at changes that we can do as far as our licensing system. Can we move to some e-licenses? Those are all options that are on the table. We're looking at what other states do. It's always difficult for us, though, in Pennsylvania because of how many hunters that we have and because of the size of our hunter population. And some of the other states where they might have, a fraction of the hunters, they can make some of those changes more quickly than we can because they're not dealing with almost 1 million hunters. But nonetheless, like I said, we're always trying to be adaptive and make sure that we're getting the best data and making sure that we're being as innovative as possible. So I would anticipate some changes coming down the road.
Yeah. And I wasn't saying there was an issue with the current system where I felt like there was. It was just that was something that I thought was neat.
It is neat, yeah.
The way they did that. And
we certainly, again, are always open to ways that we can improve. So I take your comments in that vein and appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, so what about some other changes that we got? First round of antlerless licenses for all WMUs will be guaranteed for residents through July 7th when non-resident sales begin.
That's right. That's something different for this year. If you think back in 2023, I want to say it was the first time that we got away with the pink envelopes or away from the pink envelopes. I'm sure you remember the pink envelopes, right? That was,
I gave a thumbs up for anyone that's listening.
So you had to, go through that application and check it twice and 3 times. And, your ability to shoot a doe was dependent on filling out all 7 steps. And we even had the check boxes. And I can remember dropping it in the mailbox and being like, crap, did I sign my check? So you're always, on edge until you got that license back, phew. So change comes slowly in Pennsylvania. We finally got to the position where the law was changed to allow us to sell our licenses, sell antlerless licenses. Previously, the reason that you went through the pink envelope is you had to mail it to a county treasurer. Only the 67 county treasurers in Pennsylvania could issue a doe license. So the law was changed to open that up. Let any of our issuing agents sell an antlerless license. And that first year, 2023, and I talked about how the first year you're always wondering how it's going to play out. Well, that first year played out where there was a rush. And we sell licenses at our headquarters. And I remember getting into the parking lot around 6:30 that morning, and there was already a line waiting to get in. I mean, that had stretched around the side of the building. And I knew we were in for a long day that day. And sure enough, we were. And, the system was stretched to the max there it was really a bottleneck, trying to get hundreds of thousands of hunters through processing their sale, get their license on time. And we went through it, and as rough as it was, we got a lot of data when it was all said and done about hunter behavior, about how quickly units sold out under this new system, what that looked like. And then, I talked about making changes. So we made some changes that went into effect last year, where we were in a position where we could say, except for 3 units, everybody else, we're going to guarantee you a license in that first round. And that was based on those sales trends, what we saw from the previous year. Once we got through that bottleneck, I think what was really eye-opening about that is there was that initial rush, and there didn't have to be, because we still had units that had licenses available for the rest of that first round. So we said, how can we make sure that bottleneck doesn't happen moving forward? And given what we saw with hunter behavior, given what we saw is how quickly those units sold out or didn't sell out, as the case may be, last year we were able to say every hunter for every resident Pennsylvanian who wants a license in any unit except those 3, and they were 2G, 1A, and I'm blanking on the 3A, maybe it was. So except for those three, we're going to guarantee you a license at any time during that first round. Doesn't matter when you buy your license. It can be at 8 a.m. on that first Monday, or it can be at 11:30 on the last Sunday, at 11:30 at night on the last Sunday. You're still going to get the license that you want. And it had the effect that we were hoping it would. It spread out that demand. We didn't have that mad rush at 8 a.m. on that Monday morning. Now, we still sold a lot of licenses that Monday just because it's tradition, right?
Yeah.
First in line, first, you got to get your license. and I talked to so many hunters who come through our headquarters and are like, so why were you here so early? It's like, well, this is what I do. And for a lot, this is the kickoff of hunting season is buying my license. So even though it's June and 90 degrees, I still got to get my license because I'm thinking already about October and November.
Yep.
And we get that. I certainly can appreciate that. But we didn't get that mad rush. We didn't get the system being slowed down or crashing or anything like that. So what we saw, though, is even some of those units that we had held back, we didn't have to hold them back. We could have integrated them into that first round.
Oh, they weren't.
They didn't sell out like we thought they would. So what that gave us the comfort level going into this year is now we're in a position where we can say any resident hunter, Pennsylvania, who wants an antlerless license in any of our units across the state, we're going to give you plenty of time to do it. You're going to get that first two weeks time period, and certainly check our website for dates as to specifically what they are, because it changes every year. But you're going to get that period into early to mid July. So take your time. There's no rush. Buy a license when it's convenient for you. It's going to be there.
Yeah. And
then for round 2 is when we'll start to make adjustments. So we'll look at what the sales are for round 1. And then we'll make decisions as to how many are available in each unit for round 2, and we'll make our hunters aware. All that information is going to be on our website, so you can make a decision. All right, I got my 4C license in the first round; it was guaranteed. I didn't have to rush, but now I want to get a 2G license. Well, they only have 7,000 left, so I better get that one next. And you can make those decisions, those informed decisions as hunters. Because what that's going to do is really most hunters are just after that first license.
Yeah.
They want that one license. So we're thinking this is really going to spread that impact out, or spread that demand out, and keep that system going and be able to sell license in a really customer friendly way.
Yeah, that first year I was definitely cursing the system pretty hard. It's funny because just a couple years before that, Idaho had moved to that system for their elk tags, and I was having the same issues. I was like, you got to be kidding me. When I saw the bar come up, I said, it's the same system. I knew what was coming online of it, but I'm glad that is now changed and makes it a lot easier.
One of the most difficult things I had to do was go out into our lobby and tell everyone, hey, the system's not working right now. And it was packed. I mean, it was standing room only, elbow to elbow. And I had to say, I have an announcement. The system is really slowed down right now. And you know what, though? I will say, by large, it went over fine. People were joking about it. I got a lot of, we knew this was going to happen. We knew, that's why I took today off. I knew this was going to happen. There was some good-natured kidding going on. People give us a hard time about it, but we got through it. And it was a good thing we did. We took the data, we made decisions, we've changed, we've adapted, and now we should have a real easy first round sale of licenses.
Yeah, good.
Knock on wood. Hopefully it doesn't come back and haunt me for saying that. But somewhere our IT and licensing department are cursing me for saying that. But I think it's going to be all right.
Yeah, awesome. Well, what other changes do you have coming up this year? So I mean, if you have them off the top of your head, you're welcome to.
Yeah, we've hit on the major ones. The bear season change is one. Again, I'm really happy with that because it shows how effective hunting can be and how we have the ability to be adaptive. So that's going to be one. Certainly recommend, our hunters, you always have to check the digest, right? Because we don't just copy and paste those seasons year after year. You always have to check them. But certainly the bear one is going to be a change. Our turkey population seems to be doing really well.
Yep.
So there's going to be, but you have to check where you are for each WMU as to the season length for that fall season. But we're pretty encouraged by what we're seeing with our turkey population. It's so weather dependent, turkeys. You get a cold, wet spring, which is localized, right? It might be cold, wet in one area and beautiful in another area. That impacts that population. So,
yeah.
But nonetheless, really excited about what our fall season should look like for turkeys. Elk. I mean, what's more prized in Pennsylvania than getting that bull elk tag? I mean, that's, really something that we have about 30,000 hunters who put in for that. And that's going to be coming up before we know it, that drawing. Mm-hmm. We're looking at about 65 bull tags, if I have the numbers right, about 75 cow tags. So, really exciting opportunity for some hunters to get get a chance to get drawn for a world-class bull. And that's, I know you've been up there and been at that Elk Expo, and there's a lot of enthusiasm behind that. So.
Oh yeah, it's pretty cool. I actually got to participate in one of the elk hunts here in January.
Did you?
A friend of mine had drawn a tag, and
awesome.
And I got to participate in the hunt just for a day. I was only able to go there, but it was super cool.
What tag did he draw? Cow or bull?
It was a bull tag.
Okay,
yeah,
right.
It was what zone was it? It was the most eastern zone there in
14 or
might have been
okay.
I think it might
Potter County.
Yes, it was,
okay.
Yep.
Kettle Creek.
Yep, that whole area. Yeah. So I got to go do that, which that was really cool. The weather wasn't cooperating as good, and a lot of it was hard to find those bulls, which we did. He ended up filling his tag then.
Nice.
Later in the week, but it was really cool to be able to see that. Growing up, seeing the elk and putting in for this, and then knowing someone that drew a tag, so that was really exciting to be able to see. Yeah,
they are incredible animals, and I know 14 myself because that's where I hunt, and I was just up in the end of April scouting for turkeys, and I was walking back this ridge, and I came around the side, and there was a herd of elk, and we were all just staring at each other, and then one turned, and they went running down the mountainside, and I had never heard a herd go down a mountainside before. I'll tell you what, it sounded like a tornado going through there. It was unbelievable how much racket they made going down the side of that mountain. And then the bird I was listening to, though, once they got to the bottom, I was like, well, he's not going to gobble again. And he went off. I couldn't believe it. He was just 50 yards away from me. He just went off again.
Really?
So for him, it was they must be used to it. He knew what it was, but that was pretty cool. And growing up in going to that area, you never saw a herd of elk before. So it is still very almost surreal to see something that majestic back in those mountains.
Oh,
and it's pretty cool.
It is. It is super cool to see that in Pennsylvania, and I look forward to the day that hopefully I draw an elk tag and be able to go hunt them for myself. But even just getting to be a part of it with a buddy of mine, I mean, that was just the same type of experience. It was really cool.
That was definitely one of the negative things about taking this job. Is I figured I can't get drawn for an elk tag. So I had to switch over to just buying a preference point. So it killed me because I was like, watch, this has been the year that I get drawn. I can't have that. I can't run that risk. So I'm just at a preference point for the foreseeable future. But
that's probably a smart move.
Probably a smart. Could you imagine at the Elk Expo if I get drawn?
Oh yeah. No.
Yeah, I don't think I want to run that risk. But I'm right there with you. One of these days I'll get drawn. I'm sure of it.
Yeah, I actually do just a specific podcast on that every year on how to apply for elk, and kind of going through that in Pennsylvania, and going through. I've done it with Jeremy Banfield. Great. And I've done it with him, and I've done it with Brian from Elk County Outfitters. So I've done ones with him, and actually I was just texting him we're scheduling one to do again for this year's with some of the changes and stuff. And then also just we talk stories of the past seasons. Those guys guide a lot of people. So it's pretty cool to be able to see that. But there's some changes coming up there on the elk side too. Yeah,
there are. One thing our board implemented that will take effect in 26, and just to make sure we're clear on that, because we've already started selling those applications, so you can't make changes, midstream. But changes that are going to go into effect for 26 is there's going to be a cap on non-residents being drawn, and it's 10%. And when that seems to be about the nationwide standard, I want to say, some go a little higher, some less, but for beginning in 26, we're going to cap it at 10% number of non-residents that can be drawn. I think it's pretty safe to say a lot of Pennsylvania residents are going to be pretty happy with that change. Every time I go up to the Elk Expo, that's probably the number one question I get is why haven't you capped it? So that cap's going to go into effect. Our board made that change. Also for 26, there's going to be beginning we talk about bull elk being a once in a lifetime opportunity. And that is in fact how the regs are going to be structured now, is it's going to be one and done, where if you get drawn for that bull, it traditionally has been, and up to now has been about a 5-year, I think it is a 5-year wait period. Yep. So the board amended that to mean it's one and done. So what it's really about is just spreading that opportunity out. There's not a ton of hunters who get drawn multiple years, but there are a few.
Yeah. I met a guy that drew like 2, maybe even 3, at least 2 times. I was like, are you kidding me?
Yeah. I know one guy who got drawn, took the 5-year waiting period. His first year back in, he got drawn again. I mean, come on. So, the board made that change as well, where capped it at 10% for non-resident, and then beginning in 26, it's one and done. Again, just spreading out those opportunities for those other, tens of thousands of hunters who put in year in and year out.
Yeah.
So those changes are going to take effect. And also, one thing the board also added is that, again, beginning in 26, you're going to have a license, a qualifying license, a general hunting license.
Yep.
And if you apply at other states, I know Colorado did this a few years ago.
Yep.
Every year I get my Colorado small game license.
I do the same thing.
Throw it away. Like, I'm not going to use this, but it let me apply.
Yep.
So that's going to be going into effect. And again, just kind of making us consistent with other states, spread out that opportunity because, I can't imagine seeing my name drawn for a Pennsylvania bull. That's pretty cool. We want to have as many people as possible get that opportunity.
Yeah, I think that's really good. And I'm a non-resident, and we all are in 49 other states. So like when I go to hunt other places, I appreciate, letting non-residents come in, but I do believe that residents should, have some different perks to living in the state in particular. That's, Wyoming's like that, 10%. I think Montana's the same way. All these states that I apply for out there are that way, and that's just the way it is.
Yeah, I don't want to say it's universal, but it's pretty close to it.
Yeah.
I mean, I was even looking. I think it's Vermont for moose. It's 10% cap on non-residents. So it's we tried to find that nationwide standard, and 10% seemed to be pretty close to it.
Yeah.
Certainly, though, even there still will be a number of non-residents who get drawn. And the reality is, what we were seeing is non-residents were getting drawn about 12 to 13%. So this is just going to decrease it a little bit. Still a good opportunity for non-residents, and no doubt there still will be a lot who apply because they see the caliber of Pennsylvania bulls, and you can't blame them for wanting to get in there, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, most definitely. Well, I didn't realize that was only 12 or 13% that drew now.
Right. So in reality,
you shouldn't have said that. Now everyone's like, you didn't really give us anything.
It's not going to be this huge monumental change.
Yeah.
It's just not. But nonetheless, it puts a marker in at 10%, and
it's a max at 10%.
It max it out at 10%. Absolutely, it could come. But it's. We hear that a lot from our resident hunters, and you're right. They have a more stake in the game.
Yep.
So it makes sense to do it, and it's consistent with what's happening nationwide.
Yeah. No, that's great. Those were kind of like the big changes, I think, for this year. Right?
Yeah, they were. Yeah, I think we've hit on all those highlights: the DMAP changes, the bear season, elk.
Yeah.
Those are the big ones, but certainly still always recommend hunters check their digest before going out every year.
Yeah. Are there for example, if hunters wanted to give feedback or just give respectable feedback on things or things they'd like to see differently or things they like, are there ways to do that are you accepting those types of things?
Always. So we have 4 board meetings throughout the year, and there's always before those meetings the opportunity for public to come in and give comment. We set aside the beginning of each meeting, and it varies. Sometimes we might have several hours of comments. Sometimes only a handful of people show up, but that's a way to just address the board directly and say, here's what I'm seeing, here's some changes I'd like to see, here's some things I think you can do better. We welcome that, but for those who can't make that, if you go on our website, there's the form, contact us, where we review that daily. We send it out to our board every week, say these are the comments that came in this past week. And I can tell you for a fact, there's been plenty of times where somebody has had a suggestion, said you should take a look at this, and we followed up on it and went ahead and implemented it. I've seen it happen many times throughout my career. We are always open to that feedback. So we welcome it. We want to make sure that we're doing the best that we can for our hunters. So we provide plenty of opportunities, be it in person, like I said, at our board meeting, or just go on our website, find that form, send it out to us, and it'll be reviewed.
Awesome. No, I appreciate that. Steve, is there anything else you want to talk about before we end this?
No, I think we hit the highlights, like I said, and
yeah.
I can't thank you enough for giving me this opportunity. This has been great.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you coming here and hanging out and getting to know you a little bit. So I appreciate the opportunity there.
All right. All I'll ask is, if I do get a mountain buck this year, if you feature me on Mountain Buck Monday. That has been my goal for a while. So
we'll talk about it.
Okay. All right.
I accept all submissions there,
All right.
and I'll share everyone that comes in. So
I just wanted for bragging rights with my brothers. I want to show them that I made it. So if you could do that, I'd appreciate it.
Let's do it.
All right. Sounds good.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, man.
Appreciate it.
Beau.
Hey guys, thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed this conversation, share it with your buddies. Leave us a rating, a review, and subscribe. If you want to check out more content like this, there's plenty in the links below. We truly appreciate having you guys along with us.